Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
There is a slight danger, it has been pointed out rather wisely, that I am about to become a turkey voting for Christmas, because I'm going to share with you my discomfort at this growing trend of what we'll call them racist rants and or tirades being put up on the internet and going viral. I am, however, fairly immune from hypocrisy on this, because if you phone a radio station, then you are expecting, indeed hoping, to reach a much, much wider audience than you do when you're at home just shouting at the tins of pineapple. Because I do, and I mean it, and it, as a liberal, it puts me in quite an unfamiliar position, because ordinarily I would consider myself dedicated to the calling out and the very, very robust fighting of racism and indeed racists. And yet, on this issue, I am finding myself feeling sympathy is possibly not the right word, but it's the best I've got at this juncture. Some sympathy for the people caught on camera being disgusting on a bus or on a train, and now most recently on an aeroplane. This is such a minefield. These are the days when I really envy the tabloid rabble-rousers, because it would be great to have a conversation about something like this, pretending it was really simplistic and binary. But it really isn't, because first problem I've got is that one I've just mentioned, that you say that you're not comfortable with these people being essentially held up for public disgust without the full details being known, and you get cast, I'm talking about myself now, as someone who's somehow sticking up for the racists. You know, it's not dissimilar to the way in which, if, as I frequently do, I insist that everybody finds the action of these largely Pakistani grooming gangs absolutely disgusting. But I'm not more disgusted by them than I am by the teachers at my old school or by the people caught up in the CSA inquiry. I'm not more disgusted by them because they're brown. Then racists will turn around and claim that you're somehow defending them or excusing them, and that the only way you can really show that you hate these people is by jeopardising their trial and possibly seeing them go free. That's the real sign of a concerned patriot. So I think it's increasingly important for clever people to pay a little less attention to the really stupid people. I think a lot of the problems we cause in this country have been a result of decades of peace, during which, in the interests of balance, equivalence, tolerance, I don't know what you'd call it, people who are demonstrably wrong and not very nice have sort of elbowed their way onto top table. They've got their season tickets for Question Time, and they've always been booked to appear on television. I mean, I want to live in a country where we actually revere honesty, integrity, decency, and yes, intelligence. I think intelligence is massively important. And unfortunately, those four attributes, honesty, decency, integrity, and intelligence, actually add experience to that. Honesty, integrity, intelligence, experience. That's what they mean when they say elite. Those damned elites with their qualifications and their experience, their decency, their honesty, and their integrity. So I'm not going to worry about how silly people may respond to this, but I am certainly going to worry how black people may respond, because I'm white, and possibly this is me exercising white privilege on a grand scale, saying, I'm not sure that these horrible racists deserve to have their horrible racism plastered all over the internet. Eventually someone will probably die as a result of the public shaming, I think. But I don't know. I'm not even sure it's my bridge to fight on, to be honest with you. So there was one last week. It was a woman on a tube train, I think, or a train, an overland train. She was vile. I mean, we've heard it. People come close to it. There's a bloke on earlier complaining about too many black people living on his street and arguing that he's not a racist. I think it's a bit like somebody in the bath with the water up to their nose arguing that they're not wet. But you can't break through that thickness of skull, so it's probably a waste of time trying. I've got two questions for you. Do you want to hear a bit of the latest example? This is someone who he looks to be in his 60s or 70s, besuited. He has the look of a professional, and he sought to get to his seat on a Ryanair plane, which involved asking a elderly lady, a widow who'd been taken away for a holiday by her daughter in the hope of distracting her from the fact that it was the first anniversary of her husband's death, and she had to get up to let this man into his seat, and did so very slowly. And that prompted him to embark upon the kind of racist tirade that would have fitted right in on the terraces at Millwall Football Club a few years ago. Here's a taste.
Don't you dare shout at her! Don't tell me what to do!
Preparing to take off from Barcelona on Friday, a black woman defends her elderly mother from a tirade of abuse from a white passenger. David Lawrence filmed the altercation, which seemed to start when the disabled woman did not get up from her aisle seat quickly enough for her fellow passenger.
The first I was alerted to anything was the loudness of a voice behind me, of a man shouting at a woman saying, "Move your feet." It was so loud that it caught my attention.
I'll tell you this, if you don't go to another seat, I'll push you to another seat.
The abuse becomes more heated as he responds with racial insults when the woman speaks to him in English.
Don't talk to me in a foreign language, you stupid ugly cow. Hey, stop. I will carry on as long as I can with this ugly black.
One passenger repeatedly tells him to stop, but most others do not get involved.
There was no reaction from a lot of the passengers that were directly around me and the situation. There was nervous smiles, some giggles and laughs. And then one particular passenger, as he was walking down the aisle past me, he said to me, "Don't you think this is childish, you filming?"
But it's the lack of action from Ryanair itself that's angered many, with the airline choosing to find another seat for the victim rather than remove the offending passenger. The airline has said via Twitter that it's aware of the video and has reported it to the police. That won't satisfy critics who say in other circumstances Ryanair is happy to use its right to remove drunk, unruly or abusive passengers.
It's going to be very difficult for me to fly Ryanair again. They took too long to respond to this. I mean, it was the film was posted on 2 days ago, and it's only now I understand that they're responding, which is absolutely unacceptable.
The clip, which has been viewed online over 2 million times since it was posted on Friday, ends with the man sitting alone, as was his wish.
I'm all right now,
and assuring a flight attendant that he's now fine.
Not massively illustrative, because of course we had to pick the bits that didn't contain any swearing or any particularly toxic language, but he referred repeatedly to her colour, and indeed to her accent. She was a woman who came here during the Windrush movement, and it's horrible, but I go and have a look at it. No, am I doing that thing now? Oh yeah, here we go. Here's some hand-wringing. Should we or shouldn't we be publicising these issues more by posting them on the internet? Head over to the LBC website and have a look for yourself. That does make me a bit of a hypocrite. But I'm not 100% sure that I'm right, and I want to know what you think about the suggestion. So I will plead some mitigation on this. And I do find it fascinating. I do find the changing of social boundaries, the resurgence of all these ancient hatreds that have been given weight and air and oxygen now. I do find it fascinating, as I simultaneously find it very chilling. So the one on the train last week, the woman who was clearly either high or drunk or something else. And the reason why I'm struggling a bit in this introduction is because obviously I'm thinking in the back of my mind of mental health issues. But I don't like the conflation of mental health issues with toxic public racism. It might be an explanation, but it will never be an excuse. And the massive, massive majority of people with mental health issues would never dream of racially abusing anybody, anywhere. So that is part of the reason for my discomfort. But I think when I'm discomforted or discombobulated, I generally tell you why. And we can work it out together. That's why it's so important to ignore the idiots now, because if we're to be honest with each other, then you can't pay any attention to the people deliberately pretending not to understand in order to score some sort of cheap points against the libs. Owning the libs by pretending to be stupid is pretty much the motto of late 2018. So you've seen that. The one last week was a woman being horrible. It's usually the kind of, go back where you came from, this is our country, kind of UKIP-y type sloganeering. And again, it's very difficult to tell these people that they are beneath contempt when they can quite rightly turn around and say, well, it's pretty obvious that bloke on Question Time thinks exactly the same as I do, or that bloke on LBC thinks exactly the same as I do. Why are you telling me off for being a racist cretin when some people get paid handsomely to do it on the telly and the radio and in newspapers? And that's the point about education, isn't it? You're a massive racist and you go to a public school, like say Eton or Dulwich College, and you manage to mask your racism in acceptable language. You don't have much of an education, you don't know how to put on the camouflage of civilization when actually what you're doing is appealing to the most base and disgusting of human instincts. So yeah, all right. I will take my medicine on this one. I feel sorry for the man in this video. 0345 6060973. He's either not well or not responsible for his actions. And the reason I say that, for the record, I feel a million times sorrier for the woman in the video, and if I had been there, I'd have sat on the man. I don't know whether that constitutes a crime. There's no point getting involved in the shouting match, because that just escalates. If the staff weren't intervening, then there's not a great deal you can do. He looked to be much older than me. You wouldn't want to actually have a fight. Also, I'm rubbish at fighting, I think. It's 30 years since I had one. So I'd sit on him. I'd just sit down on top of him, very gently, until the situation hopefully became suitably ridiculous for him to shut up. I say, I'm going to sit on you now, sir, until you are quiet. As soon as you're quiet, I will stand up. But I'm going to sit on you, because if the staff aren't prepared to remove you from this plane for shouting racism at this poor woman, I'm fairly confident they're not going to remove me from the plane for sitting on you. And even if they are going to remove me from the plane for sitting on you, the processes are going to involve at least some scrutiny of the person being sat on. So with the greatest of respect, and there's no romantic intentions involved, I can assure you of that, because you seem to be the sort of man who might be terrified by the thought that there could be. I am now going to sit on you. Think of me as a pineapple. Think of me as a pineapple ring placed gently upon your gammonness. That's what I would have done. And I'd have done it in that tone of voice, and I'd have done it in a way that was hopefully going to make people around laugh, and I'd have done it in all of these ways. But yeah, I feel a bit sorry for him, because my faith in human decency leads me to this conclusion. He's so out of order. He's so rank and rancid and unpleasant, and he's so public that I can't believe it's fully conscious and deliberate. This is where I suspect my listeners of colour are going to get quite cross with me, and I will withdraw, because you will tell me that you perhaps put up with stuff like this on a much greater scale than the rest of us realise, and that the suggestion that all of these people are somehow not responsible for their actions is profoundly offensive. In many ways, it's as offensive as what it is that they say. To which I'd respond by saying, watch the specifics, because I'm only talking about cases that have gone viral, and the reason why they go viral is because they're man bites dog territory. They're not dog bites man. There's a level of, and no one has battled more racists than me in this country over the last 10 years. I suspect that's probably a statistically supportable, because no white person has battled more racists than me in this country over the last 10 years. It's the fact that I keep winning that makes them so angry, of course. But I say that because I look at these viral clips and films, and I find myself thinking, I wouldn't let that person on air. That's it, we got there. I love it when that happens. Bang on 11:15 as well. That's where my thinking has come from. Thank you for indulging me. I wouldn't let that person on air. And if they got put through, I'd be moving them along very, very quickly. I mean, there are occasionally exceptions. There's that character in Sandbach a few months ago, but you wonder whether you need to protect people from themselves. But generally speaking, you get a sense, it doesn't happen very often because the producers have an even stronger radar than I do for this sort of thing, but very occasionally someone gets on and you think, well, this would be proverbial radio gold, but I think we might be exploiting someone's vulnerability here. And that is why I don't know that I'm entirely comfortable with these videos going viral. Discuss. And as ever, I'm not asking a really clear and formalised question. I'm generally asking you how you feel about what I've said. But of course, underneath that is the question about how you feel about these films, these viral videos of really toxic racism, that I am either so naive or so trusting to believe can't be realistic reflections of these people. There must be a reason why they've gone so mad so publicly, and that reason isn't necessarily the one that immediately presents itself. But you can pull me to shreds on this one if you want. I'm big enough and ugly enough to take it, but I have spoken from the heart. It doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that I'm sincere. These videos that go viral, I'm not going to pretend that it's an area of this industry that I don't understand. I understand it incredibly well. It's changed my life in many ways, this notion of clips going viral, and quite a lot of my viral clips have involved people either being very, very bigoted and or racist. A few reminding me of the fella who rang in, and I liked him. I'm not going to lie to you, the bloke who rang in and ended up saying that he'd voted for Brexit because there were too many brown faces on the tills in his local Tesco. He made the book. That's a radio phone-in, though. It's not the same as someone having a bit of a fit on public transport and getting filmed without their permission, and then it being broadcast all around the world. And you know, if it turns out that someone had forgotten to take their medication, or that somebody had... What if you'd been bereaved that morning? Or you just don't know why people are behaving in the way that they behave in public. And that is why I'm profoundly uncomfortable with the idea of it being filmed and disseminated before the facts are known. But I am, you can tell by the knots I've tied during my introduction, I am preparing for a bit of a roasting on this one, and I'm prepared to take it. 11:21 is the time. Colette is in Enfield. Colette, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm your first black caller. And
you're my first caller, actually, on this issue as well.
First caller?
Yes.
But I'm also black, and I think that may have some bearing or relevance, or gives you an idea of where I am coming from.
Yes.
And because you said you were being sincere and you were coming from your heart,
always.
I'm trying to. James, stay with me.
I will.
I'm going to try and do this as gently as I can.
Aye.
Did you say why?
No, I said aye, because I'm preparing for a robust examination.
There are a couple of themes that struck me throughout your introduction.
Yes.
Now, the first point was about the video clip going viral. I, for one, celebrate the fact that it has gone viral.
Yes.
And the reason why is, as a black person, the times we have been told that we have got a chip on our shoulders and that this isn't happening and it's in your head.
Playing the race card.
Yep, is why, for me, the clip is important. The clip is important for me is because the woman who was attacked was an elderly black woman who was coming back from, I'm not sure which island, because I think it was a year after her husband had died, and her daughter was taking her there to, you know, it's a stage after you've lost your husband, that first year. And I think also what struck me in your introduction is that the excuse that this person might have been mentally unwell, and therefore we need to perhaps distance ourselves from that, is, for me, totally unacceptable. It's the excuse that's used when someone is blind drunk and therefore they can let rip. And then the excuse is, well, they were drunk and they didn't need it.
It's not quite, because, of course, one does choose to get drunk. No one chooses to get ill. But I'm possibly splitting hairs. I don't think I am, but I'm thinking out loud.
And for me, the issue is, think out loud by all means, is that it's the impact of his behaviour on this elderly woman. And for me, you actually used the word toxic public racism.
Yes.
It's almost very similar when you're on a bus or a train and someone becomes aggressive or rude or being racially offensive, and everybody starts looking at the floor or their shoes or the posters. And it's almost like a collective paralysis. But the person who's at the end of that attack is numbed by the experience. Does that make sense?
It all makes perfect sense. It's the scale of the dissemination that gives me pause. It's the fact that, you know, every area of this man's life is about to be turned upside down. And
I think...
Go on.
Sorry.
No, you...
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I do it all the time. Don't apologise for interrupting. If I started apologising for...
I'm a good Catholic girl. I've been brought up not to interrupt, James.
Well, because I interrupted the priests at school that I managed to avoid some of their Clutches, we could argue, but the Catholicism or otherwise of our interrogatory techniques notwithstanding, do you see any sense at all in what I've said?
I understand your angst. I understand why you're torn on it. But the other issue that I had with you was that when you said the person was UKIPing, how do we describe Goldsmith when he was running for the mayoral election and the kind of whistle-dog politics that took place? What do we do? What do we say with Labour in their angst with the Jewish population?
Yes.
And what Brexit has done is almost opened this floodgate of it's okay to be racist in public. And I take umbrage. You can be racist with me because I'm nearly 60 and I can handle myself, but you don't go and attack an elderly black woman. You don't do it. You don't do it with anybody.
You don't go and attack an elderly woman, full stop. But if you're if you're going to then refer to her colour repeatedly while attacking her, then you exacerbate your offence. What if, I mean, in an entirely theoretical universe, what if he turns out to be fragile, mentally fragile? What if he ends up hurting himself because his face has been plastered all over the internet?
There's two things.
Yes.
A couple of things, I think. One, I don't actually think he was mentally fragile.
That's why I said in a theoretical universe.
I think I felt more sorry for the policeman who locked his car doors when we had the incident outside Westminster, because the level of vitriol directed at this individual made me stand up and pay attention.
Well, this is Orwell, isn't it? This is the 2 minutes hate. It's all we do now. Anything goes as a reason to just get the mob chanting and screaming and baying.
And you've put your finger on it for me. You've articulated what I've been struggling with listening to you is, what kind of country have we become when we've become almost a bullying en masse society?
Oh, we've become the monster that Dr. Frankenstein, a.k.a. Rupert Murdoch, has spent the last 30 or 40 years creating.
Then we're there. And I think the young man, or I don't know how old he was actually, who did the clip, did us a disservice, because you and I are not having a conversation about racism exists.
We are.
We are?
Yeah, we are, but we are partly. That's part of this conversation. You're telling me that because this kind of experience is commonplace and it is often dismissed and disbelieved, then the filming of it is justified. And I completely agree with you, up until the point where I ask you, what if it turns out he's not very well?
I remain to be convinced. And even if you have mentally unwell people, they still know what is right and wrong. And what he did was cause damage to another human being.
Yes. I tell you what best case scenario would have been, that Ryanair staff dealt with this, chucked him off the plane, it didn't need to be filmed, and the woman was made to feel comforted and looked after. The Ryanair staff appear to have been utterly ill-equipped to cope with this, and that is part of the other conversation, although I hope you take this as evidence of how seriously I've taken your contribution, Colette. I'm not going to have time to talk to anybody else before the 5:30 news, and I still... Am I allowed to not be certain on this one, Colette?
Well, I think because usually when you have your conversations, you get to the end of the hour and you say, I've learned something here and I've moved on, or I've stuck in my position. I think in 30 minutes time, you'll be able to answer your own question.
We shall see.
Don't know.
We shall see. We may even carry it on. I will remind you of a I don't know if joke is quite the right word, that was doing the rounds when I was young, which speaks, it's just occurred to me, precisely to this experience. And it involved, the way the story was told, I'm sure it's apocryphal, it was during apartheid-era South Africa when a white South African woman got onto an aeroplane and found that she'd been seated next to a black man, and she kicked off hugely. I can't sit next to this man. It's disgusting that you expect me to sit near him. I demand that you move me. And the hostess, and bearing in mind this was the 1970s, makes her way up the aisle and leans down over the seats and says, I'm so sorry that you've had to experience this. I completely understand how uncomfortable you must feel. Would you like to be upgraded to first class, sir? And I've always loved that little vignette, albeit only as an observer rather than, like Colette, as a potential participant in that sort of scenario. It is approaching 11:30 somehow already, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm wondering and suggesting that we probably shouldn't be getting quite so comfortable with short clips of people filmed in a public space, often on transport for some reason, behaving in an utterly vile and racist fashion. I think there needs to be racism to nudge it up the levels of going viral. People being simply obnoxious probably wouldn't get the same traction. But the racism displayed by the man on this Ryanair flight, and also over the weekend someone sent me a story of a man in Sainsbury's as well, behaving in a very similar fashion. No one would come down harder on these people than I think we can all agree on that. But whether or not they deserve to be publicised in quite this way before we know more about them, I would, for Colette's brilliant contribution to the programme notwithstanding, I still feel uncomfortable about it. For the very simple reason that, and a couple of you unhappy that I mentioned bereavement as a possible reason for it as well. So just give me a moment, Franklin, I'll be with you very, very quickly. But I always think of road rage. And just that thought in the back of your head that person who's just jumped out of the car in front of you and is now running towards you may never have behaved like that before or since in their life, but they may have had a terrible experience that morning or last night or yesterday, or they may have something terrible that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy going on at home. And some people just snap sometimes. Now, if I snapped, I'm pretty confident I wouldn't refer to your skin colour in the context of snapping. But do you know, when I'm reaching out for something with which to hurt you, I might refer to your weight, perhaps, or something, another attribute that I would never, when sober and calm, I would never go near. So, again, possibly I'm just digging an ever deeper hole, but until you know more about the people in these clips, I'm a little bit uncomfortable drawing massive conclusions about what they stand for and what they believe. 11:36 is the time. Franklin is in Wimbledon. Franklin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
I've got a similar story, I suppose, as the gentleman on the plane that we've seen footage of today.
Go on.
But it was my mum that was involved. And I'll give you a little backstory. My mum's been, she had alcohol issues.
Can we just fix the phone a bit, Franklin? Sorry, mate. I know, I don't know whether you've put me on speaker or something like that. I just finding it a little bit hard to follow. Can we do that? Are we good? Should we try again? Sorry, Franklin. Start again, mate, if you don't mind.
Is that any good, James?
That's a million times better, Franklin, yeah.
Oh, I thought it might have been a bit loud. Sorry,
no
James.
worries.
Your
mum.
My story's about my mum. She was filmed in a similar situation. Backstory to my mum is she's an alcoholic.
So
she has been.
She was the person. Years. She was the person ranting.
She was the person ranting and raving, and it was on public transport.
And was it one of the ones that we could have been talking about on LBC? If
you so could have been.
So it was a massive viral clip of your mum having a racist rant while drunk, presumably, on public transport.
I wouldn't say it was a massive viral clip, but it had the potential of being so.
Yeah.
The twist in the story is my mum's a white lady, my dad's black.
Oh, boy.
So I'm of mixed race, and my brothers and sisters are, and so are my children.
Yeah.
And so the first we knew about this was one of our friends contacting us and saying that your mum's being filmed on public transport, ranting at a lady who happened to be a journalist, who happened to post it on Twitter, which we were all mortified about.
Of course you were.
We kind of knew the situation and what was going on, and the fact that, you know, we had suspicions that Mum, where she'd been drinking for so long, had wet brain. And basically,
I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is.
It's a bit like, so if you drink for a prolonged period of time, you lose a lot of your filters. Okay. So you will say anything to anybody at any point in time. You don't necessarily mean it. It's just a case of you just, you know, it's a mental issue rather than an actual, I don't know, it's just, you know. So me and my brother, we tried to get in contact with the woman that was posting this video, or the first person to post this video up before it could get shared too many times. But then more of our friends were contacting us and saying they'd seen it.
Oh, what a nightmare.
It is. It's embarrassing. We was concerned for my mum's safety because, you know, Mum wanders off when she's drunk. Yeah. She's gone. You know, she can go for days at a time. We've dealt with this for years, you know, tried to get Mum help on a number of occasions. never quite works out. So, as you can imagine, James, it was scary and embarrassing as well.
Of course.
You know?
And it's hard to imagine someone in a better position than you to comment on this. And obviously I'm mightily relieved that you, with your incredibly personal experience, kind of support what I've been quite clumsily and cautiously trying to say. It doesn't necessarily...
I understand. I understand the outrage of racism and being racially abused, because I have been myself previously, and I'd still continue to be racially abused at certain points in time. It's just you learn to live with it. But my mum was always the person that taught me how to deal with these sort of things.
Mate.
So for my mum to be doing this, is entirely out of character. We did manage to get in contact with the lady that was posting this video and sharing this video continuously.
Yeah.
And she was trying to get some traction with it, if you know what I mean.
Of course,
she was in media.
Yeah, I get that. I also have to remind you that she was probably pretty traumatised by this.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it for a second. But we contacted this person, 24 hours, 48 hours after the incident, and very apologetic, as I would be,
of course,
and explained the situation to this lady, and it was a case of she wouldn't contact us and she wouldn't have anything to do with us.
She just put her head in the sand. See, here's the thing that you pose.
Yeah.
At what point, I wonder, do people feel their own needle move as you tell your story? Because when you said she was an alcoholic and she may have had a wet brain, people would still, I suspect, be, in vino veritas and all that. And but then you add that she is the mother of mixed-race children. Her partner, your dad, is black. Mm-hmm. And then you questioning whether or not her racism is real. There
is a story behind this. There's a story behind the alcoholism as well. Yeah. And there's reasons for these things. And, we're all very quick to judge, but we are all dealing with our own demons. And this is not an excuse for my mother, but we are all dealing with our own demons.
It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And for my money, that explanation is enough for me to believe that it should not have been disseminated as widely as it was. It feels...
And I promise you that my mother is not a racist. She really isn't. She was just having an episode.
She's got that silly phrase in the back of my mind at the moment. As some of my best friends, some of my best children are black, she could say, in defence of lack of racism.
It is almost comical. It really is. If it wasn't for the fact that I was so scared for my mother's safety.
Of course.
Because of, we live in a multicultural area. We live in a multicultural society. And, I've grown up on one of the biggest council estates in the UK. And, it hasn't always been as open-minded as it is now. My mum will tell you stories of things being thrown at the pram that I was in when I was a baby. I'm now sort of like in my 40s.
Yeah.
But you can imagine what that was like in the 70s. A young white female with a brown baby with a massive afro.
Mum would have been on the receiving end of way more racism than any other white people would ever even know existed.
Exactly.
So, I still don't know, Franklin. Thank you for sharing this. It must have, you presumably wish it had never happened and put it out of your memory forever.
Yeah.
What about all the others that aren't your mum? What about this bloke on the plane? Until we know more about him, some of my critics online are calling me an apologist for racists today. And I said I'd take my medicine today. I don't think I am an apologist for a racist, precisely because of what you've just told me.
Exactly. It's not the first time this has happened. It won't be the last time it will happen. My mum still continues to be an alcoholic, so we still have to live with the fact that this could happen at any point in time if she has another episode and it goes the same way.
But here's okay.
We really hope it doesn't, but there's a possibility that it could.
Of course there is. Can I play with your brain a bit? Do you mind?
Of course you can.
All right. Isn't your mum the collateral damage because of all the people that abused you and her when you were young, all the people that are, if you like, bona fide racists? They're not in the grip of alcoholism or mental fragility. If you let them off the hook because they might be your mum, then loads and loads and loads of it goes unchecked.
Of course. But what I would also say is there is people that are obviously mentally struggling,
yes,
and there's people that are just being vile and disgusting towards you.
Exactly.
And they're of their right mind.
But you can't tell the difference at the time.
You can't tell the difference initially. But if someone's screaming at you with slurred speech and they've been sat on on some sort of public transport with their head to one side, mumbling away to themselves, it's pretty obvious that this person's probably struggling with
that then becomes actually oddly that doesn't help the man on the Ryanair plane who doesn't fulfil any of those. So it's just exercising a little bit of scrutiny and decorum. How likely am I? And you don't have to answer this. I don't want to embarrass you. How recently did this happen?
This would have happened around about 4 years ago.
Okay.
So, and it was, I don't know if you remember, there was another case in Croydon again.
Yes.
Where it was a young lady that was absolutely disgusting, but it turns out that she had mental issues as well, but she was jailed for it, I believe.
I would have to find out more details. I mean, if it was genuinely illness involved, it would have been in plea mitigation. Well, presumably decent lawyers were present. Franklin, mate, thank you for that. I mean, crikey, I was lost for words after talking to Colette. I don't know whether I'm coming or going now, because that's exactly what I was talking about. I was talking about, without even knowing she existed or that Franklin had been through what he's just described, I was talking about his mum, wasn't I? I said, can you be sure it's fair to send this around the world? And yet, with Colette's call before about if we don't publicise it and broadcast it, people will continue to insist that it's not true. People will continue to underestimate the scale of the problem or the virulence of what now passes for public behaviour in post-Brexit Britain. You wouldn't be aware of it. And, of course, in pre-Brexit Britain as well, although I think most of us would agree there's been a sort of validation or a kind of amplification of these sort of views by the processes of the last couple of years in Britain and in America, of course, which is all a very roundabout and characteristically verbose way of me saying I don't know what to think anymore. And I establish without a shadow of a doubt that somebody being vile and racist in public is in full control of their faculties, and I will retweet it until the cows come home. But until you've established beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person isn't Franklin's mum, the mother of mixed-race children, in the grips of violent alcoholism, which prompts her to do things which he, as her son, can assure us are utterly out of character, that's why this topic exists. It's why I took this angle on this subject. But I am going to end the hour, I suspect, throwing my hands in the air and saying, I don't know. I just don't know. Tracy's in Ealing. Tracy, what would you like to say?
Well, good morning, James.
Hello, Tracy.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for having the bottle to cover this subject, because I know you're going to get stick for it, and I just want to say that off the bat.
To be honest, at risk of being glib and flippant, being called a racist apologist is such a refreshing opposite of what I normally get called on this programme. I can't take it with a pinch of salt. Carry on.
Yeah. Well, where I'm coming from is I grew up in an old white neighbourhood, and I rarely saw a black face. So I did get a lot of racism from white people. And over time, my neighbours who were white, some did remain racist.
Yes.
But others, the more they got used to my family and spoke to us and interacted with us, we did get on.
Yes.
And we developed strong bonds. To see this man, I saw this on Twitter, and somebody had said, retweet this as much as you can. We've got to find this person. And I thought, gosh, it's like a witch hunt.
Yes.
And I don't really care whether he has a mental illness or he's an alcoholic. I don't care. He's a human being. And to have a whole country descend on somebody like that is
But they're doing it out of,
I
mean, some people will be doing it because of a sort of mob mentality, but I'd like to think the majority of people who were exercised in the way you describe are doing so out of concern for and protection of the woman on the receiving end of his rants and his racism.
I am so protective of my mum, James, that if she would have been in that seat and he was doing that to my mum, I've never had a fight in my life, but I swear to you, they probably would have had to hold me back.
I find that very easy to believe.
So I get it, because when I saw that lady, my mum's a Jamaican woman, and I immediately put my mum in that seat. So I get the outrage. Trust me, I get the outrage. At the end of the day, he's one man. He's one human being. What should have happened is, I do agree it should have been recorded.
Right.
That recording should have gone to the police. If the police want to track this man down, then that should be within their power to put that out.
I think I agree with you. What if the police didn't do anything? Then were there any circumstances in which you'd stick it on Facebook without knowing more about this man? Because I think I'm probably not quite as good as you. I think I would stick it on Facebook. If I took it to the police and they said, not clear, not this, not that, then I don't know. Because, again, I'm contradicting myself because I wouldn't know more about the man. Well, what if the police did nothing? You answer the question that I can't answer. I insist.
I don't know if this would work, but what I would have done, I would have got the media involved, and I would have asked them to put out the video with not showing his face, but asking people on the flight who were on the flight to come forward.
Maybe. I mean, this could even make things even more complicated. But you recognise the central thrust of the argument this morning, which is that this could end up making a bad situation worse and not actually help anybody, least of all the poor woman on the receiving end of his tirade.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody took the law into their own hands and attacked this man, and it's just awful. I just think it's such a scary thing, and like you say, you don't know this man's circumstances or anything, but to me that doesn't really excuse it, because at the end of the day, he's a human being.
No one's excusing
it. Yeah, but he's a human being.
Yes.
And you can't treat somebody badly because they've behaved badly. It doesn't work like that.
No, and also, this welling up within that many of us feel when we see things like this, it could be equally fed by offering support and compassion to the woman, rather than sort of throwing red meat to the mob in pursuit. I mean, I'd rather have a mob being anti-racist than being pro-racist, but equally, it's still a mob, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think it serves anyone. And I think these days there's a lot of talk, particularly with Brexit, about civil unrest. And
yeah, of course.
There's all this vigilantism.
March of the Gammon.
It's just, yeah. But I just think, we need to deal with things in a good way, in a positive way. We can't just be scrambling.
Yeah, although I suppose in the case, I think Nick spoke to the fellow earlier who filmed it, and there was an air of impotence to what he was saying, because the staff didn't do anything. No one called the police. Of course, he could have done himself, but he filmed it, and then he stuck it on social media because he wanted a response. He wanted to draw attention to the behaviour of the airline, but you would point out you could have done that while pixelating the man's face until more was actually known about him.
Absolutely.
Tracy, I think you're on it.
If somebody behaved terribly in my family and that happened to them, I would give them a talking to, but I would be horrified for them. That nobody deserves that.
Well, that's why Franklin's call was traffic stopping, wasn't it? Because it was his mum.
Yeah.
His mum, his white mum, for the mother of a mixed race family, mixed race children, launching a tirade of racist abuse at someone of colour on public transport. And you do see these clips, as Franklin suggested, and you do see a demeanour sometimes. I don't know that it applies in this case. It's grainier footage or more difficult footage than some of the ones on trains and buses. Tracy, thank you so much. I should just to extract a degree of levity from a very serious conversation. Quite a few of you have pointed out that my suggestion that I would sit on this man until he stopped, very politely, I just say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm going to sit on you until you stop. No violence, no particular, like a ring of pineapple sitting on a big juicy gammon. That's what it would be like. A lot of you have pointed out that that's not a very clever suggestion because it was a Ryanair flight, so there's barely enough leg room for one person in their seats, let alone two. Keith's in Birmingham. I've only got about a minute, Keith. I apologise for that, but these calls have been...
I'll be quick then, James. I'll be quick.
Good man, Keith.
I'm dual heritage, half Welsh, half Nigerian. There's a good mix for you.
Yes.
I'm 55. I've experienced racism literally from day dot, you know what I mean, from the 70s, really overt racism.
Yeah.
It's been very covert, certainly before Brexit. People will use subtle, insidious ways to get across their negative points. But my view is the same as Me Too movements. If we don't be firm and stand up and say, enough's enough, it's just going to continue. I mean, the environment at the moment, it's impossible for me to work. I mean, I've been a social worker for 15 years. I've had to give up the job.
Why,
I
mate?
mean, I can't
understand.
knock on doors now. It's a case of people are blatantly saying to me, I don't want a black social worker. And there's a degree of cognitive dissonance, you know, in this post-colonial Britain,
Yes.
where, you know, people cannot see a person of colour advising them how to be decent parents. So I think the massive impact of racism, it's becoming so overt.
It was funny. There was
there
a bloke on earlier with Nick who had a bee in his bonnet about me, and he was celebrating. You know, I only heard it out of the corner of my ear because I was in the office upstairs where there's quite a lot going on. He was saying it's great that we're finally doing this, and it's great that we were talking about paedophiles, and somehow brought it back to him being called a racist for complaining about how many black people there were living on his street. So that's who you're talking about, isn't it? People who've felt as if they can't stand up in public at the moment and say, I don't want black people living on my street, or I don't want a black social worker, or I don't want a black person sitting next to me on the plane.
It's totally toxic. I mean...
But you think they now feel that they can, or some of them, or a lot of them. I'm not qualified to comment. I think you're right. But
no, as I say, I have noticed a massive increase of blatant nationalism.
And here's the thing, because anyone listening to this now who goes, yeah, right, of course you have, playing the race card, chip on your shoulder, get over it, something rude.
Not that old. Not
that old chestnut, something rude about Diane Abbott. And then we go back to the first caller of this hour who said the reason why you have to film it and you have to put it up on the internet is because people don't believe us.
This is it. And as I say, it's the same as the Me Too movement.
Yeah, it is the same.
We have to be firm and be strong and tell people enough's enough. You know, from simple things like saying stuff, oh, you've got nice skin, or, you know, making dismissive comments like that.
Where do you really come from?
Pardon?
Where do you really come from? You say, well, I come from Birmingham. I said, yeah, but where do you really... I know you said at the outset you're half Welsh, half Nigerian, but that's the subtext.
I'm considered to be an immigrant.
Yes.
Because before I even open my mouth, you know, I'm 6'3". I walk around the streets and people look at me clutching their bags, and I've had enough. I've just had enough.
Well, don't have enough, because it's just the loudest voices that are getting the most attention. The massive, massive majority of people will be feeling the same that you and I feel about stories like this and about issues like... No, I promise you it's true. And it is just a temporary blip in the history of decency in this country. But I like your parallel with the Me Too movement, because it is a massive shock to many people who thought they understood these issues, to learn just how deep and widespread these things are. I do often wonder, actually, to knit together a couple of stories from last week and this week. If you remember the President's Club dinner, when those rich men, mostly white, were treating women absolutely appallingly, hands up skirts, gropings, all that kind of thing. I did often wonder how that would have reached the ears of much of the great British public if it had been a room full of brown taxi drivers rather than a room full of white plutocrats. But it's just the way my mind, and indeed my forthcoming book, works. It's 2 minutes after 12.